Welcome back to Retro Rebound. In today's video, your boy Link is here, and he's playing Ocarina of Time for the first time. That's me with my ocarina, by the way. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, never played this one before. I know you're gonna look at me kind of funny, but I've actually owned the Nintendo 64 card for at least a decade. I remember getting out of the Great Deku Tree, and I dropped the game. But now with the Tears of the Kingdom hype ramping up, I'm really excited for this game because, you know, I see all these videos on Twitter and on YouTube of people like shooting themselves to Ganondorf's castle, and they're like, oh, look at all the sandbox elements. And I'm thinking, most players aren't doing that. But then I look at Tears of the Kingdom and the things they're doing where you could like mush together a shield and a mushroom, and I'm like, that's the sandbox stuff I would do. That makes sense. So I'm really excited for the game. Unlike Breath of the Wild, where I was like, okay, let's see what it is, and it ends up being fantastic, but it didn't really resonate with me as much as I think it has online with other people. So I'm very excited for Tears of the Kingdom, and to kind of get into that Zelda mood, I wanted to, you know, check one off. I think the gaming must-play list, which would be Ocarina of Time, among many others I've got to get to, but this is a good time to play Ocarina of Time, to get in touch with the series roots, and especially speaking of Breath of the Wild, I'm glad I did because I saw so many parallels between the two in design, whether it be just simply climbing walls, the interactive nature of the world. There's just so much that reminded me of Breath of the Wild, where I can see why so many Zelda fans were so thrilled with Breath of the Wild. But now with Tears of the Kingdom coming around, I'm just trying to clean up my Zelda backlogs. Here we are talking about Ocarina of Time. First time playthrough. So ladies and gentlemen, if you're new here, you're into nostalgic and retrospective content, consider subscribing. We got a lot to go through. We have the actual 3DS port. We have a complete unboxed Nintendo 64 game to unbox. And then we've also got, yes, the Prima strategy guide. I got into my OG gamer bag with this one. What I mean by that is I haven't gamed with the strategy guide since Oddworld Munch's Odyssey, one of my favorite games ever. I remember that game stumped me as a kid, but getting the strategy guide, it was like unlocking a whole new world, finding all the secrets. And I know these older games and I know how I am with puzzles. I was like, you know what? This is actually a really good time for me to just get into that. And I want to show you some of the strategy guide. But first, let's go through a classic copy of Zelda Ocarina of Time for the Nintendo 64 complete in box. I don't typically collect these Nintendo 64 games because, I mean, the state of the box kind of speaks for itself. It's torn, it's dented, so hard to preserve. I'd say more difficult than Game Boy Advance. You got to really pay the extra money. But anyway, for the sake of nostalgia, for appreciation, you can see the emboss right here on the Zelda text, which is awesome. Designed for the Rumble Pack. I just love that only for N64 art. But the back says, let's read. Ganondorf, the evil king of thieves, is on the move, threatening the peaceful land of Hyrule. He is determined to steal his way into the legendary Sacred Realm in hopes of harnessing the power of the mythical Triforce. As the young hero Link, it is your destiny to thwart Ganondorf's evil schemes. Navi, your guardian fairy, will guide you as you venture through the main regions of Hyrule, from the volcanic caves of Death Mountain to the treacherous waters of Zora's domain. Before you complete this epic quest, you'll delve into the deadly dungeons, collect weapons of great power, and learn the spells you need to conquer the most irresistible force of all time. Got some great pictures here in game, like Link playing the Ocarina, the Master Sword here, some boss fights ongoing, just a lot of cool stuff. I love this picture here of Hyrule because it just going inside Hyrule for the first time, it really was Final Fantasy vibes to me personally. The way the camera was fixed and there were pre-rendered backgrounds, it just was such an interesting game to witness because there were so many parts of exploring it where I thought, this is an N64 game, because, you know, ever since I've grown up and got to experience more video games, I really have learned about that major power difference in an intimate way between the PS1 and the N64. Like, I think of Spider-Man 64 as one of my favorite examples, right? Some of the opening cutscenes for that game on the N64 are comic book style panels, which I actually think works for the game more. But when you look at Spider-Man 1 on PS1, it's more cutscene driven. And I remember seeing that. It's like a whole world of a difference. Same thing with Power Rangers Lightspeed Rescue on PS1 versus N64, like complete night and day difference. So to see a game that's so open and expansive and meaty as Zelda Ocarina of Time. Like truly an impressive game. So the description of the gameplay says, the immersive storyline in environments draw players into an amazing 3D world. Time travel allows you to play as Link in different stages of his life. New gameplay features include a unique targeting system and first and third person perspectives. I laugh because the unique targeting system, generous way of putting it, and up to 3 games can be saved simultaneously to memory. Yes, we were in that time period. So let's go ahead and crack it open. You can actually see Link aiming his bow and arrow here on the side, which I think is just a cool little touch here. Again, these boxes are filled with such detail. Of course, there's only 2 things to show you. There's the cart, which we have here. Beautiful as always, nice and pristine, no stickers outside of this here, but no stickers, no marker, none of that nastiness. And then of course, we've got the manual, which functions much more like a booklet. You know, normally when we pull out these manuals, I mean, this is a tall, fat one, thick, love that type of stuff, right? So cracking it open right away, just greeted by wonderful illustrations, a map of Hyrule, which was actually quite useful to navigate because, again, this is all new to me. So just seeing Hyrule Field and saying, okay, to get to Zora's Domain, I need to go east through the river. Okay, got it. I just found it extremely useful. And then it breaks down a lot of the options in the game. Because remember, like they just mentioned on the back of the box, saving 3 different files was a big deal, right? So this is, you're going to see like some pretty basic breakdowns of things like Navi and Z targeting and pretty much how you can aim. I played this on the Nintendo 64 straight up. I had my Eon HD, that little adapter that Eon sells. That's fantastic. So I had to reacclimate myself with one of the most janky controller designs, which was interesting when you got to things like Z targeting. Talking to faraway people, aiming did not feel good at all. They go through some of the gameplay, what all the UI on screen means. The control stick, all the different movement options you have. I talked about wall crawling. They have that, running, jumping, which is just automatic when you leap off a ledge, diving and swimming. Yeah, there's a lot of movement options here, which I thought was cool. And I like that they have a little illustration for everything, throwing the bomb, you know, opening the chest, climbing down from something. I just love how they capture every little bit of it. Swinging the sword vertically, horizontally. There's a little bit of depth to the combat, which I thought was kind of surprising. Jump attacks, backflips, a lot of movement options here. Your items, your subscreens, all that great stuff here. The ocarina itself, all the other major items that you're going to find in the world. The fairy bow, the hook shot, the megaton hammer, and much more until you have a complete arsenal. And you'll see here just so much stuff for you to get, so much shown off. And this is all useful if you were to fire up the game completely blind, which again, you'll see the instruction manual down here, or sorry, the strategy guide. I did not. But yeah, tips for your adventure, cutting the grass. I love how they call that one out. And yeah, that's pretty much it. So that is your complete in-box copy of Zelda Ocarina of Time on the Nintendo 64. Cool one to have in the collection, no doubt. Definitely gonna have to get a protector for this one, otherwise it's gonna collapse. And I have some bubble wrap stuffed in here to make sure it doesn't collapse too easily if it's on the shelf or something. But let's talk about the game a little bit more. So when it comes to Ocarina of Time, this is a game that I appreciate a lot for its time, but my goodness, is it a great remake candidate. What I mean by that is some of these dungeons, for example, are... I gotta just get it off my chest before I get into anything else I love about the game. Some of these dungeons are super punishing without good reason. For example, I'm fighting Phantom Ganon. You know, I die a couple of times. I use all my fairy bottles. I use a ton of arrows. I'm thinking like, okay, save my game, retry, and lo and behold, it loads me without the fairy bottles, without my arrows, and so I gotta run around and farm some more. This is where the game kills me because the exploration is thought-provoking, the interactive nature, especially for its time, the way I see objects, and I'm like, I think I can do this. It feels very modern in its design, and that's fascinating for a game from the late 1990s. But when you die or you mess up, I know some of you are gonna be like, skill issue, bro. Look, first time, I don't care. You could skill issue me till the cows come home. But I hated dying in this game because my items were gone and then I had to find a way to farm them, and it just inflated the time I was in these very tough dungeons. What's also frustrating is with no dedicated jump button, when I was like missing ledges or whatnot because I'm trying to maneuver with the N64 controller, oh my God, when I jump off the wrong ledge in like the forest temple and I end up having to go all the way around, or when I died into Dongo Cave and I had to go all the way around, up, down to the bridge, jump across, go into another part, yeah, it started to kind of wear me down. These dungeons are commitments, like 2 to 3 hour, in my experience, commitments where I got to be ready to just pay attention. Because what I did was I would focus up, do what I could, and if I ever got super stuck, that's where the strategy guide would come into play, get that old school gamer vibe. And you'll see this strategy guide is absolutely beautiful. I mean, they got maps for everything. You're going to see illustrations for everything, and especially when you get to the temple section as adult Link, you'll see here just fully colored, fully illustrated, absolutely beautiful work here, and very, very helpful, mind you. But that was my general flow, and that's the sole complaint I had to get off my chest. I just had to talk about it because if they were to remake it and just do some quality of life enhancements, yeah, like I totally 1000% agree. Like, this is one of the best made games of all time. Is it one of my favorites of all time? No, but it's definitely one of the best made video games I have played, because constantly reminding myself, oh, this is like a 1998 game, insanity, especially with now the perspective, the benefit of time of knowing what PS1 games versus N64 games looked like and the limitations the N64 faced. I forgot another good example was Mega Man 64 versus Legends, just night and day differences. The fact that Ocarina of Time accomplished what it did is really, it speaks to the ethos of Nintendo, their very DNA, where you look at the Switch, everyone's like, oh, it's an old, dying console. And then you look at the graphical quality of something like Luigi's Mansion 3 and you go, how? Or we're looking at Tears of the Kingdom. Now, I could regret these words. Who knows what performance is going to be like, because it was a problem for Breath of the Wild. But we're looking at Tears of the Kingdom, this expansive world, and how? On the Switch, this late into its life cycle? How? So I'm very impressed by Nintendo's ability to continue to show people that like their technology can be ancient and still make awe-inspiring games, because at the heart of this game and many Nintendo games is just breathtaking creativity and also a spirit. There's definitely a warm spirit to this game. The soundtrack in Ocarina of Time is what I would define as a nice warm blanket at night. I feel like I can wrap myself in it and get nice and cozy. Whether it's the title menu that just feels like the beautiful tone setter for the experience, to something like, I'd say, Zora's Domain, this kind of gentle, light music playing in the background. There's just a calming element to the whole thing. Despite how agonizing some of these temples and dungeons are, the music in this game is absolutely fantastic. I literally could not get enough of it. But you know what surprised me? Because I feel like Zelda music has always been great, has always been iconic. What surprised me more than anything was the depth and the intrigue I had in the storyline. It kind of reminds me a bit of how I felt going into it, mind you, with a Mario game. Oh, how am I going to save Princess Peach this time? Oh, yeah, okay, whatever. How am I going to save Zelda this time is what I'm thinking. But as you learn more about Link and the way the narrative is presented to you, such as the truth behind the Triforce and the various sages they're connected to, and how you learn about these sages, the truth behind Link, who believes he's from Kokiri Forest, but there is much more to Link. It's things I knew, but seeing the origins of those things I knew and how they were described and explained and presented blew me away. Like, I really was into the narrative here. I was into how evil Ganondorf was. I loved fighting Phantom Ganon, even though that boss absolutely made me want to tear my hair out, until I figured out, oh, I can stand in cool little detail in the Triforce shadow in the corner. I can pull out my bow and arrow and absolutely ruin this dude's day after playing a game of volleyball with some magic spells. Yeah, suck it, Ganondorf. Finally got him. But you know, the way he was presented as this evil villain, and when you see him like tear off the mask and it's this skeleton who's Phantom Ganon, this game had a creepy vibe. Like, the Phantom Temple had a creepy vibe. The Fire Temple also had this isolated, I'd say prison-like nature to it. Very dangerous, very frustrating at times. Very dangerous though. I love the game's balance of narrative and how it builds its world, because it's ridiculous and disconnected from the narrative, in the sense that like you're making major leaps and having objects that I just wouldn't fathom working together, actually working together. And, you know, for example, like putting a block on top of a jet stream of lava in the Fire Temple and just shooting myself up to the next floor. Okay, cool. Like, glad that worked out. It's so disconnected and wild, but yet managing to ground itself where I'm like freeing the Gorons from their prison cells here. I just, because like Ganon had captured them. And I think all of that is working for me because it's underpinned by the passage of time. So you start the game off as young Link, which is awesome. And I'm like, oh, okay, because I hate to say it, but like a lot of my familiarity with Zelda comes down to Breath of the Wild, Twilight Princess I love, Link's Awakening, and Smash. And Smash being my first introduction to Link, who was my main for pretty much my entire life. Like I always loved the Link, but I never really cared much for Zelda. So when I played as young Link, I'm like, oh, that's the Smash character. That's how I approached it. I'm like, oh, and all the sound bites are like, hey, I like it even more now. And the moveset and everything, awesome, right? Somehow when you become adult Link, the dude gets leggings and stuff, probably because it would look really weird if the man was just running around without underwear on, just his tunic. But I digress. The passage of time works really well for this game because you get to see it in one place. Time itself moves on. And then when I stepped out into Hyrule Castle and it was just empty and devoid of life, when I stepped into Goron City and there was only one Goron there because the rest had been captured, when you see how the Arctic wind has blown through Zora's domain and how this world has changed, even Lon Lon's ranch, it's owned by someone completely different now, and I had to fight for the right to have Epona. Like, I love that feeling of a world moving and reacting to you. Even though it was very much linear and constructed that way, it felt like my interactions were so meaningful. And it's really how I felt for a while about open world games, but I feel like this game taught me that. It taught me that games can have a sense of openness, but the openness shouldn't be the selling point. It should be about, of course, I've said this for a while, what's within it, but really it's about the meaningful exploration that you have and the meaningful moments you have within it. And I prefer those smaller, tighter hubs that feel more connected and cohesive compared to a sense of openness. But this game manages to sort of bridge the gap, especially for its time, with both. So again, I found the narrative and the world building actually way, way, way better than I could have ever expected. Again, my biggest adjustment was the gameplay. I had a tough time with that, like the Z targeting, trying to aim, and it was always in inverse direction. So if I had to look down, I had to press up. I mean, there was so many ancient, archaic ways of playing this game that just have not aged well. But I feel like if they were to remake this or even remaster it, give it the Metroid Prime remaster treatment, oh my gosh, would it be perfect to a T. The other thing that I kind of regret, I call it the YouTuber L, is I had to, of course, to capture gameplay for the channel, and we always capture our own, I had to hook up the N64 and do direct capture. There's no way, to my knowledge, I've continued to look it up and research it, I cannot find like a modded 3DS, for example. There's no way to capture 3DS gameplay. And just looking at the back of this box here, just seeing how well rendered Link is, just seeing how there's no blur, no weird edges, none of that stuff. Oh man, that would have been so nice to have. And let's take a look on the inside of this one, because indeed this is complete. This was during the time where Nintendo changed how they did a lot of their manuals. You'll see here that it functions a bit like a map that unfolds quite like this. We showed this in one of our recent 3DS pickup videos, but you'll see here the basic controls, the game screen, the adventuring hints all on one side, and then on the other are all your warnings in different languages, the box art and all this stuff. And so this is how they did their manuals for some time. And then in here as well, celebrating the 25th anniversary of Zelda are a couple of things they were promoting. Things such as Skyward Sword, which look what we've got here. Maybe one day. I also bought it on Switch for the GameStop actually had a good sale. It was buy one, get one free. So I picked up Skyward Sword. And then Link's Awakening Director's Cut coming to the Nintendo eShop. RIP. And yeah, that's your complete in-box copy of Ocarina of Time on the 3DS. I probably would have liked to play it there though. I think some of my control woes would have been ameliorated there. I think maybe I wouldn't have had such a tough time with the dungeons that way. That would have been nice. But I think a couple of quality of life enhancements could have gone a long way with this game in the terms of like a re-release, and it would be absolutely beautiful. But from the music to the exploration to the narrative to some of the gameplay elements, it was really great. I was thinking about like what were my favorite parts of the whole journey, and it was really completing that tough dungeon and then fighting a tough boss surprisingly tough bosses in this game, in my opinion. Again, many of you are probably rolling your eyes, but seriously, like, for me, this stuff was difficult because I'm not familiar with it. I don't have generations of experience with Zelda, so I was having a tough time with the game, not gonna lie. And then having a narrative reward after. Like, the game always equalized gameplay reward with narrative reward. So you'd beat a boss, you'd get a miniature heart that would add an extra heart to your health gauge, and then you'd get a narrative beat afterwards. And it was a really good rhythm. I just love how the music being so good is in sync with the narrative. So when I take out my ocarina and anytime I could play Zelda's Lullaby, I was like, yes. Oh my God, let me hear it one more time. It's so good, man. Just the music in this game really is special. And Nintendo, get your act together. I would like to have this on my Spotify playlist at some point, not these orchestrated fan remakes, which are great, by the way, but there is something about Zora's Domain music that just, I just feel like if I ran a cafe or a spa, that music is running all day. People are like, oh, this is great. It's calming music, all sophisticated. I'm like, it's Zelda, bro. You don't even know. I think if I had one other complaint with the game, even though it does synchronize with the narrative, which I've praised a lot, it's the pacing, if you will. Once you become adult Link, you do get thrown into what I would call a bit of a temple gauntlet, where there are other things you could do and secrets you can discover and interactions to have, don't get me wrong, but mostly you're just going from temple to temple to temple, and that's where, again, I felt myself getting worn down because I think these are difficult. I think the way they're laid out is pretty ancient, and especially when you combine that with some poor controls, it can be, at least on Nintendo 64, pretty difficult to get through at times and really test my patience, which I'd say I'm a pretty patient gamer. I'm a JRPG fan, for God's sakes. I got time for 80-hour narratives, but that's how much the gameplay could wear me down at times with Zelda. I think that was the only other complaint I really walked away with. Otherwise, there was a weird quirk where I noticed if I were to fire up the game after turning it off and saving my game, my head thinks, well, I'm gonna be where I left off. But oftentimes when I was playing as young Link, I would start the game back in Kokiri Forest. And I'm like, I saved my game in Death Mountain Trail. Why am I out here? You know, fortunately the world is interconnected enough where you can get to these places quicker, but that was a little strange, to be honest. But honestly, at this point, I feel like I'm nitpicking a little bit because it's overall a fantastic game, and it definitely opened my eyes a bit to just how awesome Zelda is. So I'm glad I played it. By the way, for those of you who are still hanging around and wondering about complete in box copies, this did not run me much. This was I think about a $30, $20 to $30 range, and then this alongside the strategy guide was about $120. And this is like an okay copy. It's got some rips, some dents, some tears, but all I'm saying is if you want to just pay a decent price, good luck finding one that doesn't have that, unfortunately. And especially if we ever get to Majora's Mask one day, that game is spenny. So anyway, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for tuning in. These are my thoughts on Ocarina of Time, and I'm looking forward to seeing yours and all the secrets you have to share about this game, no doubt. So with that, take excellent care of yourselves, and I will see you in the next Retro Rebound. Peace